Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight at the second Housing Forum. This is a community forum where we're going to be hearing about the Housing Needs Assessment, which is in a draft format. And we're mostly going to be hearing from Barrett Planning Group, as well as others on this call, including Horsley Witten Group and staff, as we answer questions about the Housing Needs Assessment and begin to do some breakout groups where we talk about more details with the Housing Needs Assessment, as well as starting to think about some housing goals for the community. As some of you know, and you participated perhaps in the first Community Housing Forum, we are building the next 5-year housing production plan for the community. This is a 5-year plan, and it is something that we want to do in order to be able to create and preserve affordable housing in the community. There are many steps that we need to take, and as part of this process, your input is very critical to that. I want to thank personally the Department of Planning and Community Development team, especially Kelly Linema, and also our consultants who are here tonight, and the Housing Plan Implementation Committee. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Judy Barrett, who is going to launch into the meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny. So my colleague Alexis will advance the slides for us. And so I'm Judy Barrett. I'm sort of the principal in charge of the project. I'm joined tonight by Alexis Lanzalata, who's also with my firm, as well as Fiona Coughlin and Tyler Marin. We have several colleagues from Horsley Witten Group as well. Nate Kelly, Jeff Davis, Krista Moralek, and Lena Perel. And you'll all be seeing them more in a little bit when we go into breakout sessions, and they will be kind of helping to facilitate those discussions. So that's the consulting team, and we're happy to be here and happy to get to meet all of you or see all of you again and hear what you have to say. Next slide, Alexis. So the agenda is pretty simple. We're going to try to do a presentation here on the needs assessment, where we are with the planning process. When I finish the needs assessment presentation, which I admit is somewhat of a condensed and kind of higher level look at an analysis that's been done, we will take questions from folks for a few minutes anyway. We then want to stick with the agenda if we can. So we'll go into breakout sessions and have sort of 2 different discussions that will take place. When we get to that point in the meeting, we'll explain more about how that's going to work, but you won't be listening to me the whole night. We want to hear from you, which is the point of the breakout groups. When we kind of close out, we'll explain to you a little bit about a mapping exercise that will be available to all of you and others on the town website, and then talk a little bit about the next steps for this project. Alexis, next slide, please. I'm going to ask that you keep your microphone on mute, please, unless you're invited to speak by the hosts or the facilitators. We will certainly appreciate your cooperation in doing so. We'll take questions and comments at selected times throughout. It will be kind of obvious when we get to those points, because as I said, we want to make sure we hear from you. Next slide, please. Our scope, just so everybody understands, we've been asked to prepare a housing plan that helps to address needs for affordable housing identified in your community. And there's a variety of different types of needs. I think many of you know that because you're interested in the topic. That the housing is also equitable kind of across all income levels, that because there are different tiers of need depending on the type of household and the income range of the folks who need help. Discourages concentrations of affordable housing in any one particular area, is realistic in your market, and qualifies for approval by the Department of Housing and Community Development, which is ultimately the agency that determines whether these plans will be approved and therefore brings certain benefits to the town in terms of its progress in providing more affordable housing. Next slide, please. There are 3 main components to a housing plan. First is the needs assessment, which is kind of the heart of what I'm going to talk about. Then there are goals for the plan, and some of those are quantitative in terms of number of units, and some of them are qualitative, which is really around the kind of housing that's needed in the community. That's the stuff that's going to be addressed in the breakout sessions. And then implementation strategies, which are different things the town can do to address those goals and provide more affordable housing, consistent with the goals that we're going to try to work on with you this evening. There are certain characteristics of a plan that DHCD requires for it to be approved. So we'll always be thinking about those things when we're developing the implementation strategies, because again, the town has asked us to prepare a plan that will be approvable by DHCD under their regulations. Next slide, please. So far, we have prepared a community engagement plan, which we're in the middle of implementing. We've reviewed your existing housing plan and some other recent plans. The town has done a lot of planning, which has been very helpful to us. We've met with the Housing Plan Implementation Committee a couple of times. We interviewed a variety of people over a couple of days in May. We did an extensive tour of the town in June. We had our first community forum in June. I think that probably there are some faces I recognize tonight from that first meeting, which is great. We had some focus groups, some sort of group interviews focusing on some specific aspects of housing needs in the town. We've done questionnaires. The draft needs assessment, of course, has been prepared. We have invited the community or provided materials for the community to do what's called meeting in a box, which is sort of informal discussions about housing out in your own neighborhoods, facilitated by your own residents. And then I know the town staff have worked some on getting information and input at the farmers market. So there have been a variety of kind of outreach opportunities. And of course, that will continue until we're done. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about the needs assessment and kind of just some key things that we saw in the data and that also we heard from people in the community. So I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, although I think for the most part, they're fairly self-explanatory. Next slide, Alexis. When we talk about housing needs, we look at a variety of things. It's not only affordability. We look at suitability. Different households have different types of needs. Not everybody wants a small apartment and not everybody wants a large single family home. The condition of housing in the community. I know we've heard some concerns about that. And so far we're taking that to heart. Accessibility, housing units that are available to people who have a variety of types of disabilities. So we try to understand how much accessible housing actually exists in the community and how easy is it to get to it. Housing equity, which is kind of, are there sufficient housing opportunities available that are affordable and suitable for a variety of households throughout the community and not just sort of concentrated in particular areas. And along those lines, we also care a lot about choice. Just what are the choices that people actually have to find housing that's appropriate for their household, suitable, accessible to things that they need to have access to, and that of course are affordable. What are the opportunities both for people to find housing in the community and also to develop that housing and to preserve that housing? And then just kind of what's the variety, what's the mix of housing in the community? So these are all the different kinds of housing needs that we look at in a housing plan. Next slide, please. Many of the statistics, the data, the charts, the maps, and so forth in the plan look at Arlington in comparison to some other communities. We looked at times at the peer communities your town is familiar with for financial metrics and so forth. The town was already kind of familiar with those towns. So there were times in the needs assessment where we looked at Arlington in relation to some of those other communities. And you'll actually see a little bit of that on some of these slides this evening. Sometimes we looked at the county, sometimes we looked at the Boston metro region. At times we were kind of comparing the town to the state. But we also took kind of a deeper dive into Arlington itself and look at the neighborhood level to try to understand, are there differences between the neighborhoods in terms of choice, affordability, suitability, equity, and so forth. Next slide, please. These are kind of things that we sort of drew out of the analysis that we've done so far, a combination of statistics, reading, and talking to people. Arlington, and as we see it, is sort of slowly losing your rental supply to the homeownership market. I don't think that's unique to Arlington, but it's clearly there. Attracting higher income households as home buyers because your housing is getting more expensive. Losing some of your former class diversity. We've heard this from a variety of people, and you can actually see it in some of the longer term statistics about the town, and not really making many gains in terms of racial diversity. Redeveloping kind of as older built assets give way to higher value investment. The town is clearly in kind of a redevelopment mode. That's sort of what happens when a community reaches kind of the maturity of an Arlington in terms of its development. So a lot of older assets are giving way. You see that sometimes in single family teardowns. you see an interest in trying to redevelop housing or mixed use along major corridors or in the industrial district. The town doesn't really have the kind of zoning it takes to encourage a mix of housing opportunities. We have some zoning that says we want to mix. It's not necessarily the most effective zoning we've seen. And you're not really zoned to create affordable housing. Again, you have an affordable housing bylaw, but it's not really effective, in our opinion. Next slide, please. So we looked at a variety of data sets. Some of these are, again, the counties, some are compared to other towns. So we looked at, and every one of these, we kind of said, well, so who's in Arlington and then who's missing? And I think one of the things that kind of stands out in this particular slide is that relative to the county, relative to the state as a whole, your population tends to be somewhat older households, child rearing age, older households as well, which kind of makes sense because, again, the housing is kind of expensive, but also the town is very attractive to families. Next slide, please. Population by race, I don't think it's any surprise. The vast majority of the town is white. You have some racial mix, it's fairly limited. This pie chart kind of breaks it up for you. That darkest pie slice is the white population. Your Black population is remarkably small. Asians make up the largest minority group in your community, and so forth. Next slide, please. Households and families. You have an estimated 19,065 households. Non-families make up about 40% of the total, which is a little bit different in Arlington from some of the other communities immediately around you. Compared to your peer communities, your household family rate, in other words, the percentage of families as a whole is about is somewhat low. But when you get into, well, who's making up the families, it's very much weighted toward married couple families. So your town doesn't have as many families as a total of the households, but in the family set, it tends to be kind of overwhelmingly married couple families as opposed to single parent families. Next slide, please. Who lives in Arlington? People, of course, with children who are under 18. Households with people under 18 make up about 30% to 31% of the total. Most people do not have children under 18, but again, those that do are predominantly in families, and the ones that are family households that have kids tend to be married couples. Next slide, please. We looked at the racial makeup of the community and how much it may have changed over time. And I think one of the things that sort of struck us as we were looking at statistics over time is that the town's minority population as a percent of the total has changed. This is actually the public school enrollment in particular. The percentage of minorities in your schools has increased over time, really more than the percentage of minorities has changed. And some of that is probably because you have families of means who are sending their kids to private school. It also could have something to do with the influence of COVID. But COVID is a last 18 months issue. These data sets go back 10 years. And it's pretty clear that the minority percentage in the public schools has kind of gradually gone up at a rate faster than the households as a whole. Meanwhile, of course, the low income population has gradually begun to drop. Next slide, please. We looked at kind of then sort of what is the makeup of minority households in the community relative to your schools. And, Arlington's a great place to study because you have a lot of elementary schools and they tend to be kind of neighborhood based. So we looked at that in particular and said, these sort of the darker the polygon in this map, the larger the percentage of minority households. And there is some connection between where the majority households tend to be more concentrated than others and certain elementary schools. And that's kind of what that map is saying. Next slide, please. We looked at household income mix, and in this map, the darker the polygon, the higher the income. And so there seems to be kind of a correlation to us between where the minority households tend to be concentrated and where the incomes are lower. And so if you laid the schools on this map, again, I think you'd see that correlation as well. Next slide, please. This is a slide that says, okay, so let's just take all of your households and look at what percentage of the households have really high incomes over 200,000? These are blocks of census data, folks. You're probably familiar with it. They're census blocks. Block groups is what we call them. So again, the darker the polygon, the higher the concentration of wealthier households. And there tends to be sort of concentrations of wealth and concentrations of not so much wealth. And that's what that is saying. And you'll see another slide that kind of is the bookend of that. Next slide, please. These are households with incomes below 50,000 a year. And in this case, the darker the polygon, the larger the percentage. So there seems to us to be some correlation here between where your minority households tend to live and where the lower income households tend to live. Next slide, please. This chart simply kind of helps to graph the difference between household income by race and the number of households, which is on one side of the chart, and then the median income for that race is on the other side. And I think you can kind of see, the median income for white householders is generally higher than for many of the others. Next slide, please. We looked at the mix of housing in your town. Your town does have a mix, no question about it. Single family homes make up somewhat less than half the percentage of housing units overall. You have an inventory of 2-family homes that's noticeable. You've also had some redevelopment for 2-family homes. That seems to be a market in your community. Not so much of a mix in the larger structures, but there is some mix in your community, at least compared to some of the other towns. Certainly when you get to look at communities like Needham or Winchester, which you also compare yourself to, the mix is not quite so great. Yours is better, I guess I should say. Next slide, please. We looked at the mix of tenure, which is, in tenure by race. So when you look at the racial makeup of your households, how many are renters, how many are homeowners? I think you can kind of see when you look at the households that are Black or Hispanic, that you tend to find much lower percentages of homeowners than renters, as opposed to white households or others. It's just, there's a difference in tenure based on race. Next slide, please. We looked at market trends a little bit to try to understand what's being built in your community and who wants to build there and what are they trying to build. There's been, a fair amount of condo conversion in your community. That trend seems to be down a little bit, but there's been quite a bit of condominium conversion that's taken place. It's no surprise people want to own a home in Arlington. Demolition rebuild is another feature of your market. I don't think any of you will find that as a surprise. I know there's been concern about that. It in fact is happening. Again, as we said earlier, the town is in a redevelopment mode. And so redevelopment is really sort of taking an asset and changing the value of it. Well, that's happening in terms of ownership conversion. It's happening in terms of demolition rebuild. There's been some interest in multifamily and infill, which, is sort of contributing to the mix, although not all that much, but some. RKG recently did a study of the industrial areas to figure out, what might be the market opportunities there. And no surprise concluded that there's a demand for housing that could be met in some of the industrial areas that probably aren't going to develop or redevelop for industry. We also looked at kind of the building permit activity in your town to get a sense of how much actual development's taking place. Next slide, please. There's more in the needs assessment than I could possibly get into this evening about this, but we did try to break down your single family homes, your 2-family, your condominiums, and get a sense of like how much change is taking place here. One of the things we always look at in our housing plans is what's the relationship between the value of land and the value of the home? Because what we find is that the properties where the land value ratio is high, there's a much greater likelihood of tear down or rebuild or some kind of change in that property because the land is simply worth so much. This table breaks down your single family inventory by age of construction of the dwelling unit. And what you can see, I don't think it's any surprise, is that it's only in the newest homes built where you actually have a building ratio that the land is not worth more than the building. Once you kind of get beyond the newer stock, those land values really take off. So, when you're seeing kind of really, significant alterations, modernization, tear downs in your community, this is part of what the story is the land values are simply so high. Next slide, please. Supply trends, all this is doing is sort of taking kind of what the new housing units are and looking at what the composition of them is. There's a little bit of a negative on this slide, and the blue, that's single family homes. That's simply an indicator of where single family homes have been converted to two-family dwellings. For the most part, where there's been any kind of measurable increase, it's happened on the multifamily side. But overall, really not a lot of development in your community, not in terms of new or net new stock. Next slide, please. Sale price trends, your median single family home prices are way up. I don't think this is any surprise to you. The good news for Arlington homeowners is that your homes have increased in value significantly. The downside for home buyers is it's harder and harder to find a home in the community that people can buy. Even on the condo side, the prices have simply gone up dramatically, which has to do with, in part, why you're seeing the mix of household incomes go up so much. That's what it takes to buy a home in Arlington. Next slide, please. We looked at kind of, well, what can people actually afford? If you look at, here's your median sale price. Well, here's what people like the median household income for Arlington can afford. And then here's what people in the Boston area can afford, the people who may want to live in your community. And the price affordable to the sort of, a household that's at, say, 80% or 100% of the median for the Boston area is in that kind of maroon colored bar, which is much lower than what is actually selling in your community. So it's really hard to find a place in Arlington to buy because the house prices are really way ahead of what people can afford who live in the region. Next slide, please. There are challenges in Arlington to trying to address the housing needs in your community. Land availability is clearly one of them. The challenge of getting your hands on an asset before a homeowner buys it and decides to tear down the house and build up a new one, or a developer. Regulatory reform, the zoning it's not bad. It's just that it's not all that conducive to creating affordability. Local capacity is a challenge in Arlington too. I mean, you have qualified staff, you have the Housing Assistance Corporation, you have people who kind of know a lot, but there's not a lot of development capacity in Arlington, and that's a challenge too. Fair housing is an issue, again, because of the information we shared earlier about where there seem to be concentrations based on income or race and where the higher income households are, which also shows up in the elementary school statistics as well. And then housing preservation. People in Arlington are concerned about the character of their single family neighborhoods. And it's a challenge to keep older housing stock when you have market pressure that's as intense as what you've got in your community. Next slide, please. So, we've kind of identified some topics based on what we've heard that I think we think need to be addressed in some capacity in the plan. And they really have to do with building and solidifying your capacity, making sure you have the regulations that will support housing production at a variety of affordability levels, being conscious of where you may have some municipal assets that could be repurposed for housing. Public education's key. There's so much disagreement in Arlington, as you all know, about what the town should do. And people have to start at some point rowing in the same direction, which is kind of what that icon is suggesting, in order to be able to affect real change in the affordability of your community. Fair housing is also a challenge that requires people to be rowing in the same direction. And preservation is something that's going to continue to need a lot of help because it's so hard to preserve housing in the face of a market like yours. The column on the left just kind of lists the criteria that DHCD is going to challenge us to help the town address, which has to do with looking at your zoning, looking at places where comprehensive permits might make sense, understanding what the kind of housing that you need and want in your community so that what you do with your regulations relates to what you need. Looking at your municipal assets where it makes sense, and then regional collaboration. I know Arlington is already participating in some regional initiatives, but that's going to be very important to you on a going forward basis, either too, as it is in other places. Next slide, please. So at this point, we're going to talk about the breakout sessions, and I'm going to turn this over to, I believe, Alexis, or did you have something? Alexis, you have your finger up. I think you're trying to tell me something.
We're just going to open it up to, we're
that's
gonna
right.
go to Jenny for,
Sorry, sorry, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Judy. Thank you for your presentation. I realize I may not have properly introduced myself in the beginning. I'm Jenny Raid. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development. Thank you again, Judy, for that presentation and for all of the work to pull together the housing needs assessment. For those of you who haven't read the actual document, we will be sharing all of this information again when we send out a follow-up email. So in case you haven't seen those, all of that information, there will be a way for you to see everything, including the last meeting that we held in June that was referenced and all of the other materials that were also referenced tonight. So this is the first of 2 opportunities to ask questions. After we do a little bit of Q&A right now, we're going to move into the breakout groups. So Alexis will be talking about that momentarily. So I see, so the point of your question is directed at the housing, the information that was just shared by Judy. That's what we're focusing our questions on for now. So I see Elizabeth Dre has her hand up. And Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was so much information. It was so much. One of the things I'm wondering is that I saw that the data that you're using on your maps is the 2009 is taken from the 2019 census, and I'm wondering if that's going to be updated now that we actually have the 2020. I know it's draft, but more accurate data.
So some information can be updated. Most of it can't, because the Census 2020 will never have the amount of demographic information that the American Community Survey reports. So where we can update population, total number of households, total number of housing units, and race and age, those are things that we can update. But when it comes to things like income or the makeup of the housing stock and so forth, the decennial census no longer reports that. So the best that we can offer is the American Community Survey. It really is the best data source available. So some things are going to be updated to 2020 and some are not, but there are things coming out of 2020 that we won't have before this plan is done.
Okay, but the things, I appreciate that clarification, that's helpful.
Okay.
But the things that can be updated, like minority and ethnicity and diversity, that will be updated.
Yep.
On these slide sheets, these presentations?
To the extent that we have the information and it's final from the Census Bureau, yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, my mute button is not working for some reason. I think Don Seltzer is next, although he disappeared from my screen. There he is. All right, Don.
Hi, I have just a specific point about the slide you showed on racial demographics in Arlington. I don't know if you can bring it up, but it's very obviously wrong. If you look at, for instance, at the Stratton School District, Stratton School happens to be the most racially diverse in Arlington, and it's shown in a sea of white, which according to the legend is 0% minorities. And in fact, if you go look at the census data, you'll find that it's actually 19% minorities, and all of the white areas on your map are incorrect. In fact, the first 4 levels on this scale, on this map, are all incorrect because the minimum block minority percentage in Arlington is 16% or greater. There are none of those shown as being between 0 and 15% are correct. I had hoped to bring this up a week or 2 ago at the HBIC meeting, but the public wasn't allowed to speak at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm sorry. I seem to be having a little bit of a technology problem over here. Okay, thank you, Don Seltzer. The next person is Carl Wagner.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you for the presentation from Barrett Group. It's been very interesting to hear. I think looking at a cross section of the people who are participating, a lot of people from different directions really care about the affordability of Arlington. And recently, I
Mhm.
was really pleased to see that some of the people who you might think of as NIMBY types, I guess I might be one of those because I moved here like a lot of people, because Arlington occupies this wonderful razor thin place between suburbia and urbia that we
Yeah.
like so much. And that, as you yourself mentioned, about 50% of the housing stock is multi-family, and then about around 50% single family. So a lot of us love the fact that there's more than just what you might see in Winchester or what you might see in Somerville in terms of who you'll live with and what kind of housing they live in.
Mhm.
So that's been really great, and I hope you'll know that our comparison towns shouldn't just be towns like us, Needham, that are far away. They should also be towns and cities that touch us, and we're actually cheaper to live in than all the towns and cities that touch us, except for Medford. And I hope that you'll also note, even though you mentioned that the RKG study was talking about trying to add residential to build housing stock in the industrial and business areas, that even for renters, but especially for taxpayers, owners of properties, if we decrease the amount of businesses that pay tax by increasing, move business taxpayers more. So I hope you'll really realize that one of the solutions to affordability, at least as it waters down to renters and taxes that owners pay, is to keep a higher or increase a higher industrial base. That's really important. The last question I have is, I heard that one of the HPIC members has written a letter to the select board, an open letter with concerns about the draft plan, and listed a whole bunch of areas that really need to be corrected. Have you seen that, and are you planning to address the areas of problem?
We're considering what we can do with it. We're considering it.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Alexis is going to explain an activity that we are sharing with everyone here and as well to the rest of the community. So she's going to give an overview of that. Alexis, are you ready? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
Okay, hello. All right, thank you, everybody. And so this kind of is the logical follow-up to the sorts of things that you were just talking about in your first breakout group, looking at what's been done since the 2016 plan, then what you want to see in the 2021 plan. And as I'm sure, you know, in your breakout group, your second breakout group, you learned that some of what DHCD requires in terms of strategies is identifying sites for possible future development or redevelopment for the creation of affordable housing. So that's where we want to hear from you on this mapping activity. We have plans for it to launch on the town website tomorrow. And as Kelly said, you will get a follow-up email about it, but we also want to make sure it's on the website so you can spread the word to anybody else who wasn't able to join us tonight. So I'm going to screen share. The activity it's pretty self-explanatory. When you first go on to the link, there will be this welcome window that pops up. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, good. And the first thing I want to reassure you of is that if at any time you need that welcome instructions to re-pop up, there's a question mark right in the corner, and that'll just bring it back up. So we also have a training video, just 3 minutes, that will go along on the town website to show you how to do this. But this is your instructions for the activity. It explains what each of the buttons on the left-hand side does, and I'll show you that really quickly. But then it talks about what the point of this activity is, which is to add points to the map that you are identifying as something that you consider as being suitable for new development, redevelopment, something that you're saying there should be no development here, and properties or areas in need of rehabilitation. So I'm going to close that window now and just show you. So when you go to the screen, you will be able to zoom in, and you can zoom in very, very close. So you can really get pretty specific with where you're putting your spot. You can also at any time hit the home button. That just zooms you back out. And then you can, of course, zoom out further if you would like. However, when you go to add a point, it won't let you add a point to anywhere outside of Arlington. It only lets you add points to the study area, which is your town. You can also add in a specific address. If you know there's a site that you want to say, this would be a great place to redevelop, you can just put in the address if you're having trouble locating it through zooming in. The key is right here. And so I'm going to actually start at the bottom and explain the colors that you see on the map are land use. And so you'll be able to just see the breakdown there, but we look at schools, other institutional uses, open space that has conservation restrictions on it, commercial, industrial, and then various residential uses. It also includes where you have public transportation, because that's another thing that people might want to consider when they're looking at suitable locations. It also includes Arlington Housing Authority sites, so that, if there are concerns about things, sites that need rehabilitation, you can certainly make comments. And that's not limited to housing authority sites, but we wanted to give people some easy ways to navigate around the map. And then of course, also the public schools are on the map as well. As people start to add dots to the map, you will see them and you can see how the colors, what they correspond to. And I'm going to show you how to add a point now. So on the right-hand side, there'll be this add a location point. And you have to select a category. You have to select one of those four: suitable for new development, suitable for redevelopment, not suitable for development, and in need of rehabilitation. So what you like, I'm gonna say not suitable for development, and I'm just gonna say test. And then once you've done that, you have to put in a comment. You don't have to put in your name or email, but you do have to put in a comment. That's where you would want to explain in words what is good or not good about this particular area and why you would or would not recommend it. I'm going to go ahead and put it in water so as to not create any controversy. And then you have to hit report it. If you don't hit report it, it will not record. And then you will see this: thank you, your report has been submitted. The other piece of evidence that it was submitted is that you will now see the dot where you left it. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and add more points. You can add as many points as you want, and in as many categories as you want. So go ahead and you can think about it. We're going to leave it open until the end of September. So you can come back to it if you've given something more thought. And the only other thing I would say is, just in the interest of keeping the map not so cluttered for us as we view it, if you see that someone already put a spot somewhere and you agree with them, like this is not suitable for development, it is a lake, you can click on the point, and then instead of adding a new point, you'll have the option to just say, I agree. So if we see a point that someone else has added and said, this would be great for redevelopment, here's why, and we have a whole lot of hearts, we'll know that a lot of other people felt the same way. Just makes it a little easier to follow along. So again, the key that something was added is that after you've added a location, you will see that point show up on the map. And when you hit report it, so now that point is there, and you'll see that, thank you, your report has been submitted. So are there any questions about this? I know it's one of those things that'll be easier once you can play around with it, but I just wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to see what the activity was.
Can you
Yes, Jennifer Seuss has her hand up, and then Eleanor.
Oh, I just wanted to get a better sense of the difference between development and redevelopment. Is development a empty space, or is it something that might be torn down and then something else built in its place? What is the difference there?
That's a good question. And I think that'll be interesting to see the responses that we get. Redevelopment would be something that already has something on it that is being reconfigured in some way for the purpose of creating, and this, for purposes of this conversation, affordable housing.
You might even think about redevelopment as there's an existing building and it's going to be completely repurposed. It might be expanded too, but repurposed, as opposed to perhaps a site where maybe there's already an existing dwelling unit and some new construction will happen on that site as well, because the lot's big enough to support some additional construction. So I wouldn't be too concerned, if I were you, about the terminology here. It's really more a location where you think something is appropriate for affordable housing. That's my recommendation.
Okay,
Yeah.
so development seems like it's not, there's nothing really that makes sense to put as development. Does that sound right?
I would probably agree with you, but I think it's fine to say development or redevelopment. I think we'll look at what the actual property is or the location, but thank you for the question.
And also you're entering in a comment, so that will provide us with a little bit more information about the specific idea that you're trying to share. So Eleanor, did you want to jump in?
I actually
And then
go
I saw
to-
Elizabeth after. Go ahead, Eleanor.
Two procedural questions. One is the caption says future housing development, but are we to be thinking about that as future affordable housing development?
Yes.
It could be all affordable, it could be mixed income.
Okay.
And in your comment, you can note that, by the way.
And if I mistakenly hit the submit button, can I go back and erase it?
Oh, that's a good question.
good question.
I know that I can on my end. I can go on the back end and delete. So I suppose if someone really panicked and realized that they inadvertently put a point in the wrong place, you can, I would put I don't know how to best get my email because I'm the one who'll be doing the technical.
I think I think we'll set up a way that you can email a contact. And if you had some sort of technical glitch occur, you'll be able to send an email and we can take care of it on our end, because I don't think that you can remove the dot.
But we will help you, is the point.
We will help. Yes.
Okay. And my last question is, could we find some other symbol than that ridiculous little heart for concurrence?
I'll look. I think it's the default. If there's a thumbs up or something, I'll look. But I think it's just how the software is built.
Is there, Jennifer, you still have your hand up. Is there another question about this exercise? No. Okay. Alexis, do you have something next?
Nope. Just I was for opportunities or upcoming opportunities. Just a reminder that is going to be open through September 30th. And then I know that we have. Let me just screen share here.
Yeah, if you can bring the next steps up.
Yep. And then we have a presentation of the draft plan tentatively slated for early November. We will be meeting again with the Housing Plan Implementation Committee to discuss draft goals and strategies between that time. So there will be more opportunities.
And additionally, I just want to share that we tentatively have the next forum scheduled for November 9th in the evening, the same time as this forum and the prior forum, from starting at 6:30 p.m. We'll send out additional information about that. And also there's going to be a forum involving developers of affordable housing. We'll be able to hear from those developers who've successfully created affordable housing in other communities, some of the strategies that they use to create that affordable housing. And that'll also be forthcoming sometime in the next couple of weeks. So we will also send out some information about that through a town notice, as well as through the other mechanisms that we've been distributing information. So more to come and more details on that as well. And I believe that is scheduled for October 5th. And the time is at 6 p.m., I believe. Although, again, I want to say that we will send out an email with the further confirmation to come. And in that particular forum is a forum that'll be co-sponsored by a number of groups in Arlington. So with that, Alexis, is there anything else on upcoming opportunities?
Nope.
Or next steps?
Nope.
We just keep working away on this project and work toward the November 9th meeting to present it.
Okay. So thank you so much for all of this content, for sharing the mapping exercise. We are now just going to open it up to all of you for questions. Of course, I've run through the next steps in the planning process. And we're looking forward to all of those next steps as they happen, and getting your more specific feedback on the needs assessment and helping us to build out the strategies even further, of course. So a lot more is to come, and we hope that you continue to stay involved. If you don't want to stay on for the Q&A, that is understandable. If you have other plans for the evening, we welcome you to stay, or also you are welcome to go. So I want to thank Judy and Alexis and all of the facilitators this evening, all of you for participating. And I think I see at least one hand was up, which was Elizabeth Dre, for some questions. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. Just one thing I wanted to bring up, which I'm just not hearing any discussion about, which is renters. So I know that there was an acknowledgement about losing the rental supply in Arlington and move towards condoization or whatever that word is. But I'm just not really hearing much attention paid to how we keep renters or how we help renters become homeowners. Like, how do we incentivize landlords if they're going to sell the first right of sales perhaps to renters, or loans? I don't know. I'm just not hearing anything about renters, and that concerns me because that is a huge need here in Arlington. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think that that sounds like a wonderful suggestion for some of our strategies. And maybe if we need to look at some of our data points a little bit more carefully and see if we need to refine them to inform those strategies, we can do that.
And if I could make one plug for the meeting in the box, I've done a couple of them and they are great. And the town has made it so easy, and I really encourage people to do them with their neighbors, with their precinct, if they're town meeting members. You guys did a great job with that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate that. And a number of you participating have either participated in one or shared the results of your meeting with us. And we sent that along to the consultant. So if you haven't seen information about that, I'll also put that into the follow-up email to the group and the posting so that you have access to it. But you can contact our office at the Department of Planning and Community Development to get access to those meeting materials. I'm glad to hear that they're easy to use and hopefully an enjoyable conversation with the meeting prompts that are suggested. Are there any other questions? Whoa, are you sure? Now that my Zoom is working too, geez. Let me see. No, I don't see any other questions. Oh, wait a minute. Well, I am so glad to see all of you here again and appreciate your participation this evening and all of the input that we keep receiving. I hope that if you're here, it means you're committed to helping us move this forward and to help us get things done, which is where we're hoping to go when we're done with the plan. I want to thank everybody once again for all of your participation and your friendly smiles that I see, and say good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.